The blue-skinned Zephyrian leader Commander Veltar watched helplessly as orange flames spread across his beautiful world. The sky above New Zephyr Colony glowed red from the fires burning in every district. Children were crying in the streets while their parents tried to find safe places to hide. But there was nowhere to run. 3 massive hegemony warships floated in space above the planet like giant metal beasts waiting to strike. Each ship was the size of a small city, covered in weapons that could turn the entire colony into dust within minutes. The alien invaders had given the peaceful Zephyrians one final choice: surrender completely or watch everyone die. Commander Veltar Shade rushed up to him, his purple tentacles shaking with fear as he held a glowing datapad. The young Zephyrian's voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, I've tried everything. Our diplomats have begged them to spare the civilians. Our trade negotiators offered them all our resources. Even our spiritual leaders tried to appeal to whatever mercy they might have left." The aide paused, looking down at his feet with his large black eyes. "The hegemony commander just laughed at us. Said peaceful species like us are only good for one thing: working in their slave camps until we die. They want every adult shipped off-world within 2 days. The children will be separated from their families forever." Veltar felt his 6 eyes burn with tears, but he forced himself to stay strong. As the colony's leader, he couldn't let his people see him break down, even though his heart was shattering. These monsters were going to destroy everything his people had built over 3 generations on this world. The Zephyrians had come to this distant planet to escape war and violence. They had spent decades turning the barren rock into a garden paradise. Their cities were filled with art, music, and learning centers where children could grow up in peace. Now it was all going to be destroyed by creatures who saw other living beings as nothing more than tools to be used. But then, Veltar remembered something his grandfather had told him long ago. A story passed down from the old space traders who had traveled between the stars before the hegemony took control of everything. It was about a legendary species called humans who had once fought against oppression across the galaxy. Most people thought humans were just stories made up to give hope to the hopeless. Scientists claimed they had gone extinct millions of years ago in some ancient war. Others said they never existed at all and were just myths created by desperate species who wanted to believe someone out there would come to save them, but the old emergency protocols were still buried deep in their computer systems. Ancient communication codes that were supposed to reach these mythical humans if they were ever really needed. Veltar had always thought it was foolish superstition, but now he had run out of choices. He walked over to the emergency communications array, his hands trembling as he activated systems that hadn't been used in generations. His aide watched in confusion as warning lights began flashing throughout the control room. "Double quotes, sir? What are you doing?" a young Zephyrian asked nervously. "I'm activating the Terran emergency beacon," Veltar said quietly, his fingers dancing across controls. He barely understood. His aide's tentacles curled up in shock. "But sir, that's just a myth. Humans don't exist. Even if they did, why would they care about us? We're just a small colony on the edge of nowhere." Veltar looked up at the screens, showing the hegemony ships preparing their final attack. Soon, those weapons would fire, and everything he loved would be gone. His people would become slaves, their culture destroyed, their children stolen. He had to try everything, even the impossible. "Activate it," he shouted, slamming his fist on the control panel. The beacon burst to life, sending a powerful signal. Racing across the empty darkness of space, the message was simple but desperate. "Peaceful colony under attack. Children dying. Please help." The signal traveled faster than light itself, crossing impossible distances in seconds. It passed dead stars and empty worlds, racing through the void, toward a region of space that most galactic maps showed as empty and lifeless. But 847 light-years away, in a place where no one expected anything to be listening, something heard their cry for help. For the first time in decades, that something began to move. Admiral Jake Morrison was enjoying his morning coffee on the bridge of the massive warship Retribution when everything changed in an instant. The hot liquid was just touching his lips when the emergency alarm started screaming throughout the entire ship. The sound was so loud and sudden that Jake crushed his metal coffee cup without even thinking about it, the hot brown liquid spilling all over his uniform. For 20 long years, Jake had been waiting for this exact moment. He was a tough old Marine who had spent most of his life preparing for a war that everyone hoped would never come. His weathered face showed the scars of countless battles, and his gray hair told the story of a man who had seen too much violence in his lifetime. But today, all that experience was about to pay off. The bridge of the Retribution was buzzing with activity as dozens of crew members rushed to their battle stations. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, and computer screens lit up with incoming data from across the galaxy. Jake wiped the coffee off his hands and marched over to his communications officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Kelly Williams, who was frantically working at her control panel. "Talk to me, Williams," Jake barked in his rough military voice. "What's got our systems screaming like banshees?" Lieutenant Williams looked up from her station, her face completely white with shock. Her hands were shaking as she read the information streaming across her screens. "Sir, we're receiving a Zephyrian distress call. It's coming from the Kepler system, over 800 light-years away." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. The Zephyrians were one of the most peaceful species in the known galaxy. They were gentle. Creatures who spent their time creating art, studying science, and raising their children in harmony. If someone was attacking them, it could only mean one thing. "What kind of attack are we talking about?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. William swallowed hard before responding. "It's the hegemony, sir. 3 of their heavy battle cruisers have surrounded the new Zephyr colony. They're demanding complete surrender and threatening to destroy the entire population if the Zephyrians don't submit to slavery." Jake's jaw muscles tightened until they looked like steel cables. The hegemony had been the galaxy's biggest bullies for over 50 years, conquering peaceful worlds and turning entire species into slaves. They targeted anyone who couldn't fight back, destroying cultures and families for profit. For decades, Earth had been forced to watch from the shadows as these monsters spread their evil across the stars. The human race had been hiding in the outer rim of the galaxy, quietly building their strength and waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Most alien species thought humans were either extinct or just legends told by desperate people who wanted to believe in heroes. The hegemony had no idea that Earth's children had been watching their crimes and preparing for justice. "How long do the Zephyrians have?" Jake asked. "According to their message, maybe 6 hours before the orbital bombardment begins," Williams replied. "Sir, even with our fastest ships, it would take us almost 4 hours to reach them using conventional space travel." Jake smiled for the first time all morning, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the dangerous grin of a predator who had just spotted his prey, who said anything about conventional travel. "Signal the entire fleet immediately. All ships are to report to combat stations within the next 10 minutes. Throughout the hidden human fleet, alarm bells began ringing on 12 powerful warships. These weren't the small exploration vessels that most alien species used for peaceful trade missions. These were full military battleships designed by a species that had learned how to fight by surviving on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Captain Ryan Torres was eating breakfast on his destroyer, Vengeance, when the orders came through his ship's communication system. The young officer had been born and raised in space, training his entire life for the moment when humanity would finally step out of the shadows. He couldn't help but grin as he read Jake's message on his command screen. "Attention all crew members," Ryan announced over his ship's intercom system. "This is not a drill. We have a real emergency situation, and we're going in hot. All hands to battle stations immediately." The 12 human warships began powering up their most secret technology, faster than light engines that could cross impossible distances in mere hours. The rest of the galaxy believed such travel was impossible, but human scientists had been working on the problem for generations. Jake stood on his bridge watching. The energy readings climbed higher and higher as his fleet prepared to jump across space itself. His crew worked with the smooth efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire lives. "Time to remind the universe why you don't mess with Earth's neighbors," Jake muttered under his breath as the space around his fleet began to bend and twist. One by one, the 12 human warships vanished into hyperspace, racing toward a battle that would change everything. Space itself seemed to tear apart as 12 massive human warships suddenly appeared in the Kepler system. One moment there was only empty darkness between the stars. In the next moment, 12 black metal giants materialized out of nowhere like something from a nightmare. Their hulls were darker than the void around them, covered in weapons that no alien species had ever seen before. Commander. Veltar was standing in his colony's emergency command center when the sensors started going crazy. His aide rushed over, with wide eyes, tentacles trembling as he stared at the readings on his screen. Sir, 12 unknown vessels just appeared out of hyperspace. They're positioned directly between us and the hegemony ships. Veltar couldn't believe what he was seeing on the main display screen. The human ships looked nothing like the sleek, curved designs that most galactic civilizations preferred. These vessels were built like weapons themselves, angular, brutal, and covered in gun turrets that seemed to be tracking the hegemony fleet. Each ship was easily the size of the alien dreadnoughts, but they moved with a deadly grace that made Veltar's skin crawl with both fear and hope. On the bridge of the lead hegemony battleship, Commander Zakthal was having his own moment of confusion. The massive aliens for arms were working frantically at his control panels as his crew tried to identify these mysterious newcomers. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, but he had never seen ships designed like these before. Are those things? Zakthal demanded, his voice echoing through his ship's command center like the roar of an angry beast. His tactical officer, a smaller alien with gray skin and multiple eyes, was studying the sensor readings with growing alarm. Sir, I'm reading energy signatures I've never encountered before. These ships appear to be using some kind of advanced technology that's not in our databases. Zakthal's confidence began to waver, but he had spent too many years bullying weaker species to back down now. He activated his ship's communication system and broadcast a message toward the unknown fleet using the standard galactic frequency that all civilized species monitored. Unknown vessels, you are interfering with official hegemony territorial expansion operations, he growled, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who had never been challenged before. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of opposing the hegemony war machine. On the bridge of the human flagship Retribution, Admiral Jake Morrison listened to the aliens' threats with a cold expression on his scarred face. He had been preparing for this confrontation for 2 decades, and now that it was finally here, he felt strangely calm. Behind him, his bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, following procedures they had practiced thousands of times. Lieutenant Kelly Williams looked up from her communications panel with a questioning expression. Sir, should I respond to their transmission? Jake stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of the main view screen, where the image of the lead hegemony ship filled most of the display. His weathered hands were steady as he activated his own communication system, knowing that his next words would be heard across the entire star system. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force, he said in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect on 100 different
battlefields.
You have exactly 30 seconds to power down your weapons. Withdraw from this system and release any prisoners you may have taken. If you refuse, we will open fire. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. The surface of New Zephyr, thousands of Zephyrian families gathered around their communication devices, listening to this impossible conversation between their legendary saviors and their would-be conquerors. Then Commander Zakthal's laughter filled the communication channels, a sound like metal grinding against stone that made everyone who heard it feel sick to their stomachs. Humans are extinct, you fool. Everyone knows that story is just a myth told by weak species who dream of someone coming to save them. And even if you really were humans, your primitive ships would be no match for hegemony military technology. The alien commander's voice became more threatening as he continued. I don't know what backwater world you crawled out of, but you've made a fatal mistake by interfering with our operations. We'll destroy your pathetic fleet first, then finish burning this colony as an example to anyone else who thinks they can. Defy the hegemony. Jake's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Without another word, he cut off the communication channel and turned to his weapons officer. Lieutenant Williams, open a channel on all galactic frequencies. I want every species in this sector to hear what I'm about to say. Kelly's fingers flew across her control panel, and within seconds, she nodded to confirm that their message would be broadcast across dozens of star systems. Jake stepped forward again, his voice carrying clearly through space to reach anyone who might be listening. To all civilizations receiving this transmission, this is Admiral Jake Morrison representing the children of Earth. We are not extinct. We are not primitive. We've been watching the crimes committed across this galaxy for far too long, and today that ends. We do not negotiate with slavers, we do not bargain with bullies, and we do not show mercy to those who threaten innocent children. As his words echoed across the star system, Jake nodded to his weapons officer. The first human railgun fired, sending a solid tungsten rod accelerating to nearly the speed of light. The projectile struck the lead hegemony ship's shields and punched through them like they were made of paper, leaving a perfectly round hole through the entire vessel. The galaxy's worst nightmare had finally awakened, and it was ready for war. The space around New Zephyr Colony exploded into violence as the two fleets clashed in a battle unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Bright purple plasma beams from the hegemony ships cut through the darkness like deadly lightning, heating the void to temperatures that could melt solid steel. But the human response was something completely different and terrifying. Where the alien ships fired elegant energy weapons that painted space in brilliant colors, the human vessels unleashed pure kinetic fury. Massive railguns hurled chunks of metal at speeds so fast they became invisible streaks of destruction. These weren't the clean, civilized weapons that most galactic species preferred. These were brutal instruments designed by creatures who had learned to fight on a world that spent every single day trying to kill them. Captain Amy Foster was leading her Marine boarding team through the twisted wreckage of a hegemony cruiser that had been crippled by human gunfire. Her powered armor was a masterpiece of human engineering, a walking tank that could protect her from environments that would instantly kill any other species in the galaxy. As she moved through corridors filled with toxic gases and deadly radiation, she could hear her boots crunching on debris that glowed with poisonous energy. The inside of the alien ship looked like a nightmare. Emergency lights flickered on and off, casting strange shadows on walls that were cracked and bleeding strange fluids. The air itself was burning with chemicals that would dissolve the lungs of most living creatures. But Amy's suit filtered everything out while monitoring dozens of different threats that could kill her in seconds. Behind her, a squad of human Marines followed in their own powered armor, moving like ghosts through the devastated ship. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the elite of the elite. Volunteers who had trained their entire lives for missions that other species would consider impossible suicide runs in one of the damaged compartments. Amy found a dying hegemony warrior trapped under a collapsed beam. The alien was a massive creature, easily twice her size, with thick armor plating that covered most of his body. Natural protection meant nothing against human weapons designed to punch through the toughest materials in the universe. The warrior's 4 eyes focused on Amy as she approached, and she could see the fear and confusion in his expression. He had probably conquered dozens of peaceful worlds, bullying species that couldn't fight back. But now he was face to face with something he had never imagined existed. "These humans fight like demons," he gasped, his voice barely audible through Amy's helmet speakers. Purple blood was flowing from wounds that her medical scanner said were definitely fatal. "Where did you come from? How do you survive in that poison air?" Amy looked down at the dying alien and felt no sympathy whatsoever. This creature had been part of a fleet that was planning to murder innocent children and enslave their families. "We come from Earth," she said simply, "and this isn't poison air to us. This is just Tuesday afternoon." Meanwhile, back in the main battle, the hegemony fleet commander was beginning to understand exactly what kind of enemy he was facing. His tactical computers were showing readings that should have been impossible. The human ships were taking damage that would cripple most vessels. But they kept fighting as if their crews didn't even notice the hits. What the alien commander didn't understand was that every single human in that fleet had been born and raised on a Class 12 death world. Earth was a planet so dangerous that simply surviving childhood there created warriors tougher than anything the rest of the galaxy could produce. Humans had evolved, surrounded by predators, diseases, natural disasters, and environmental hazards that would extinct most species within a generation. These weren't just soldiers. They were the end products of millions of years of evolution on a world that killed the weak and left only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable alive to have children. Every human marine charging through toxic ship corridors had ancestors who had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, countless other disasters that would have wiped out civilizations. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Anderson was leading another boarding team through a different hegemony ship when his assault pod punched through the enemy hull like a bullet through paper. The impact sent shockwaves through the alien vessel. Emergency systems started screaming warnings in a dozen different languages. Mike's pod had deliberately targeted the most dangerous part of the enemy ship, the reactor compartment, where radiation levels were high enough to cook most organic life forms in minutes. But his suit's shielding had been designed by humans who lived on a planet constantly bombarded by cosmic rays, solar flares, and other radiation that would turn alien worlds into lifeless rocks. "Welcome to Earth rules, boys," Mike told his squad, as they prepared to clear the ship room by room. His voice carried the grim humor of someone who had trained for this exact scenario since he was old enough to hold a weapon. "Remember what we learned in boot camp. No mercy for slavers, no quarter for those who hurt kids, and absolutely no rules of engagement when we're dealing with monsters." The human marines spread out through the ship like a deadly infection, moving through areas where the alien crew couldn't even go without protective suits. They fought in complete darkness, breathed air that would dissolve alien lungs, and walked through radiation fields that registered as lethal on every scanner. In the galaxy, one by one, the massive hegemony ships fell silent as human boarding teams swept through them like unstoppable forces of nature. The alien crews had never faced an enemy that could survive in environments they considered instantly fatal, and their weapons and tactics were completely useless against creatures who had evolved to thrive in conditions that would make hell seem comfortable by the time the battle was over. The hegemony fleet was nothing but drifting scrap metal, and the galaxy had learned a terrifying lesson about what happened when you threaten the neighbors of a species that called the most dangerous world in the universe home. Commander Valtar walked slowly through what remained of his colony's beautiful capital city, his 6 eyes taking in the devastation that the hegemony attack had left behind. Buildings that had taken decades to construct were now piles of smoking rubble. Gardens that had bloomed with flowers from across the galaxy were burned and blackened. The crystal spires that had once caught sunlight and filled the streets with rainbow colors were shattered into millions of glittering pieces, but something amazing was happening among all this destruction. Human medics were moving carefully through the ruins, treating injured Zephyrians with a gentleness that seemed impossible for creatures who had just destroyed an entire enemy fleet. Veltar watched in wonder as a massive human soldier, still wearing battle armor that was scorched from combat, knelt down beside a small Zephyrian child who was crying over a broken arm. The warrior's hands were easily large enough to crush steel beams, but he handled the child's injury with the delicate touch of a master artist. His voice was soft and reassuring as he spoke to the frightened youngster, using simple words that even someone who didn't speak perfect galactic standard could understand. "Hey there, little one," the human medic said gently, his scanner showing that the child's arm was fractured in 2 places. "I know it hurts, but we're going to fix you right up. My name is Dr. Ben Taylor, and I've got some medicine that will make the pain go away." The Zephyrian child looked up at this giant creature with wide, trusting eyes. Just an hour ago, the child had been hiding in terror as alien ships prepared to destroy everything he had ever known. Now this human warrior was carefully wrapping his arm in bandages that would help the bones heal faster than any medical technology the Zephyrians had ever seen. Veltar felt tears running down his blue cheeks as he watched similar scenes playing out all across the ruined city. Human soldiers were sharing their emergency food supplies with hungry families. Human engineers were working to restore power to the medical centers where the most seriously injured were being treated. Human pilots were using their combat shuttles to search for survivors trapped in collapsed buildings, These were the same warriors who had just fought with a brutality that shocked the entire galaxy. The same hands that had operated weapons capable of tearing apart massive warships were now gently lifting debris off injured civilians and offering comfort to traumatized children. Admiral Jake Morrison found Veltar standing in the central plaza, where a memorial to peaceful coexistence between species had once stood. The monument was destroyed now, but human construction teams were already preparing to rebuild it stronger than before. "The hegemony won't be back," Jake said quietly, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of someone who had just fought the battle of his lifetime. "Word is already spreading across every communication network in the galaxy. Earth is active again, and every bully, slaver, conqueror out there now knows that their victims aren't as helpless as they thought." Veltar turned to face the human admiral, his voice trembling with emotion. "We owe you everything, Admiral Morrison. Our children, our culture, our entire way of life. None of it would exist without your intervention. How can we ever repay such a debt?" Jake shook his head firmly, his expression becoming even more serious. "You don't owe us anything, Commander. We don't protect people because we expect payment. We do it because protecting those who can't protect themselves is what humans do. It's who we are at our core." The Admiral looked up at the sky, where 12 human warships had taken defensive positions around New Zephyr Colony. The massive vessels moved in perfect formation, their sensors constantly scanning for any sign of returning threats. "My people spent centuries hiding in the Outer Rim, watching the hegemony and other predators destroy innocent civilizations. We told ourselves we weren't ready, that we needed more time to prepare. But the truth is, we were just afraid of what would happen once we revealed ourselves to the galaxy." Jake's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Today that fear died. The universe is going to learn that Earth's children have been watching everything, preparing for this moment when we would finally step out of the shadows and take our place as protectors of the innocent." Over the next few days, representatives from dozens of species began arriving at New Zephyr Colony. News of the human victory had spread faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world. Species that had lived in terror of the hegemony for generations were suddenly filled with hope for the first time in centuries. The first official meeting took place in a temporary structure built by human engineers, where the Terran Defense Coalition Charter was signed by 12 different species within a week. The document was simple but powerful, stating that any peaceful civilization could request protection from Earth's military forces without cost or obligation. Within a month, the human fleet had grown from 12 ships to over 100 as more. Vessels emerged from hidden bases throughout the galaxy. Species that had thought humans were extinct myths were amazed to discover that Earth's children had been quietly building the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Hegemony's remaining fleets retreated to their core worlds, afraid to venture into systems where human ships might be patrolling. Other aggressive empires canceled their expansion plans, unwilling to risk facing the legendary warriors from the Deathworld that produced the galaxy's most feared predators. Commander Veltar stood in his rebuilt city 6 months later, watching Zephyrian children playing with young human visitors who had come to learn about art and music. The memorial in the central plaza had been reconstructed with materials from both worlds, creating a symbol of the new alliance that was spreading across the stars. The galaxy had spent thousands of years believing that humans were nothing more than stories told by desperate people who needed heroes to believe in. Now they had learned the truth that would reshape civilization itself. Earth's children had never disappeared. They had been watching, waiting, and preparing for the day when they would emerge to protect the innocent and punish those who preyed upon the weak. The age of unchecked aggression was over. The Deathworlders had come home to stay, and the universe would never be the same again.